Judges chapter 15. We pick up where we left off. Samson's wife was given to one of the companions who was with him at the feast. He was no longer with this Philistine woman that he never should have been with in the first place. And in chapter 15, there's the story where the Philistines come against Samson. Your header may say Samson's vengeance on the Philistine. God would use him in a mighty way. Here we go. Later on, at the time of the wheat harvest, Samson took a young goat and went to visit his wife. He said, "I'm going to my wife's room," but her father would not let him go in. "I was so sure you hated her," he said, "that I gave her to your companion. Isn't her younger sister more attractive? Take her instead." So he goes back to the land of the Philistines to see the woman that was his wife. He finds out that she's been given to another man, but her father offers her younger sister to him. He's frustrated at this. He's dealing with a pagan culture, a non-godly culture, and they're going to have whatever customs and rules that they have. And so this is what their father felt was right in the Philistine culture. But Samson's frustrated, and he says, "This time I have a right to get even with the Philistines. I will really harm them." Verse 4. So he went out and caught 300 foxes and tied them tail to tail in pairs. He then fastened a torch to every pair of tails, lit the torch, and let the foxes loose in the standing grain of the Philistines. He burned up the shocks and standing grain together with the vineyards and olive groves. Basically, he started a wildfire. Verse 6. When the Philistines asked who did this, they were told, "Samson, the Timnite's son-in-law, because his wife was given to his companion." So the Philistines went up and burned her and her father to death. Okay, it's pretty aggressive. So the Philistines were so frustrated that they went and killed Samson's father-in-law and his wife that his father-in-law wouldn't even give to them. Samson said, "Since you've acted like this, I swear that I won't stop until I get my revenge on you." He attacked them viciously and slaughtered many of them. Then he went down and stayed in a cave in the rock of Etam. The Philistines went up and camped in Judah, spreading out near Lehi. The people of Judah asked, "Why have you come to fight us?" "We have come to take Samson prisoner," they answered, "to do to him as he did to us." Then 3,000 men from Judah went down to the cave in the rock of Etam and said to Samson, "Don't you realize the Philistines are rulers over us? What have you done to us?" He answered, "I merely did to them what they did to me." Verse 12. They said to him, "We've come to tie you up and hand you over to the Philistines." Samson said, "Swear to me that you won't kill me yourselves." "Agreed," they answered. "We will only tie you up and hand you over to them. We will not kill you." So they bound him with 2 new ropes and led him up from the rock. As he approached Lehi, the Philistines came shouting towards him. The Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon him. The ropes in his arm became like charred flax, and the bindings dropped from his hands. Finding a fresh jawbone of a donkey, he grabbed it and struck down 1,000 men. Okay, so he got a donkey's carcass and beat to death 1,000 Philistine soldiers. The Philistines were some of the most advanced militaristic people, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what weapons the enemies have, because no weapon formed against him will prosper. And the reality is this: when the Spirit of the Lord's at work, it doesn't matter what the enemy throws at you or throws at me. God's will overcome any attack of the enemy. Verse 16, then Samson said, "With a donkey's jawbone I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone I have killed 1,000 men." When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone, and the place was called Ramath Lehi, which means jawbone hill. Now this is very interesting. This is what I want us to focus on today. Basically, he names the place after his victory. It's all about what he had done with the jawbone. With a donkey's jawbone, I have made donkeys of them. With a donkey's jawbone, I have killed 1,000 men. And he names the place after his great victory. We do not hear him referring to the Lord, but because he was thirsty, verse 18, he cried out to the Lord. He's finally realizing his humanity, if you will. When the Spirit of the Lord finally leaves him, he realizes he's just as human as he was before. And he's thirsty, and he cries out to God, and he says, "You have given me this victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" Then God opened up the hollow place in Lehi, and water came out of it. When Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. So the spring was called En-Hakor, meaning he who cried on the Lord, or he who called upon the Lord. He had a change of heart, and he decided that he would change the name. At first, it was all about him, and then he realized that it was all about what God had done in him and through him. Now, I want to share one more scripture before we close because this is important. Because sometimes Samson can get a little bit of a bad rap because of the stories. Verse 20, Samson led Israel for 20 years in the days of the Philistines. You see, when we read these stories, we read over these 4 chapters and these 4 videos that we're going to have. Sometimes we can sit there and go, oh, well, he did this and it was dumb, and he did this and it was dumb, and then he died. Okay, the reality is this. There were moments in Samson's life where he made mistakes. But all along the way, God continues to show grace. It's a picture for you and for me of how God is a God of grace. But what is important for us to understand is that he led Israel or judged Israel for 20 years, 2 decades. And so, yes, he had some moments, but he also was used by God in a mighty way. And the reality is this for you and for me. None of us are Jesus. None of us are perfect. And we all have our moments. Some worse than others, but we all have our moments. And Samson was someone who was used by God in a mighty way. And even before we read this last story that's quite tragic, I remind you that in Hebrews 11, we learn about the heroes of the faith, and even Samson is mentioned there. That God refers to him in the Hall of Faith as someone who was used by God in a mighty way and believed in God. I think that that's a great encourager for you and for me, because it reminds us that even in our life when we've had moments where we've had setbacks, where we've had moments where we've made mistakes, those moments do not define us. It's the cross of Jesus Christ that defines you and me. And there's a destiny on us just like there's a destiny on Samson. And even though we might get messed up with some dangerous desires sometimes, God's mercy is greater than our failures. He remains faithful, even in our moments where we're faithless. And what I love about this picture is that God uses Samson in a mighty way, but as he uses him, he also humbles him by reminding him of his humanity. But then he reminds us that even though Samson made mistakes, he was a man who led God's people for 20 years. And I think that's pretty cool. Be blessed today.